everyone, how are you today? So in this video, we're going to be going over how to construct a cloth pad that is made in a faux serge sort of style. In order to achieve that, we're going to be using a blanket stitch around the edge. This was actually the first type of pad that I ever made, and learning along the years, I have found out a way to make them a little more sturdy than I made them initially. Making pads in this method is beneficial if you have small pieces of material that you perhaps wouldn't be able to add a seam allowance to in order to make it big enough to turn and top stitch it. Typically with this style, you would need to use materials that have less of a chance of fraying. So for instance, fleece, a knit, PUL, materials like that. I'm going to be using a cotton top and a fleece back because I think that that is going to be what's most readily available for people, but it would make for a neater pad in the long run if you were to use materials that wouldn't fray. So for this pad, we are going to be using this cookies and milk cotton print. I have the versodile test wrap pattern. This is available in her Facebook group. I will leave that link down below. I'm going to be using this coordinating blue fabric, a pin, a pair of scissors, some pins, some clips, my pin book that has my sewing needles in it, this upcycled flannel from a receiving blanket, and of course my thread. This is the top of the fabric. I'm going to flip it over to the back of the fabric, and this is where I'm going to be drawing my pattern. Always make sure that your fabrics are pre-washed according to how they typically would need to be pre-washed, as well as ironed. I'm going to take this part of my pattern, so the cloth pad pattern itself, and I'm going to place it on the wrong side of the fabric. In order to conserve material, I'm going to be placing it at an angle so that I won't have so much waste left over. At this point, you could weight down your pattern if you need to. So with my Crayola fine tip washable marker, I'm going to draw a line all the way around this pad. Make sure that the line that you make is nice and neat, because this is going to be the line that we are cutting on, and you want to make sure that your pad is even. Okay, so I have drawn out my pattern here on the back of my fabric. I am now going to cut on this line and cut out my pattern. So I have cut out on the line my pattern that I traced out. This is my fleece back that I'm using. I am going to place my cut out piece on the top. Make sure that everything is nice and flat, and then I'm going to cut around this as well. So now we have our topper and our backer. In the instance when I cut out both my topper and my backer, I like to mark on both of the pads a little mark, that way I'll know where they're supposed to line up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark an X on this wing, and an X on this wing. So I will know that both of these sides are facing up, as well as that I will know that both of these wings match up. That just makes my job a little easier later when I go to sew them together, because I won't have to worry about whether or not my top and my backer match up. So now we're going to draw out the core. This is just a receiving blanket that I have cut up to use for cores. Typically these get washed a little more, especially if you're upcycling them, so they are quite absorbent if you want to upcycle receiving blankets. So I am going to fold my fabric over like this. And then I am going to draw out and cut out 2 layers of this. You can cut out as many as you need for your pad. I'm just going to be using 2 layers for this. So now that I've got my core cut out, I cut them so that the pattern is on the inside, and I didn't even bother to cut these 2 pieces apart because it really doesn't matter, but if you want to, you can go ahead and cut them apart. Now I'm going to place my core material. I'm going to center it inside of my pad. Whenever you are putting your core inside, just make sure that you aren't overlapping the edge of the pad at any point. If you are, you're going to want to trim them before you start sewing, because you don't want to cut a hole in your core fabric, your topper fabric, or cut through your stitches if you try to cut it after you're done sewing. So I'm going to pin these 2 layers together just with my sewing pins. These are long quilting pins. I prefer to use these whenever I'm sewing. Okay, so I have finished pinning my pad. I like to use a lot of pins. You can use as many pins as you're comfortable with. You don't have to pin if you don't want to. You could always use basting spray, Elmer's school glue sticks, the purple ones, whatever is available to you, you can go ahead and use that. So out of my pin book, I am going to grab a needle. This one already has the colored thread that I'm going to be using attached to it. So I'm going to be using this little piece to start off with. I'm going to line up the ends as best as I can. See if I can get that to focus for you. And then I'm going to tie 3 knots in the very end. So if you can see that, I have 3 knots in the very end of my thread. You could just do 2. I just like to be safe and use 3 in the event that something comes unraveled. There'll still be 2 other knots to keep it there. Whenever I am sewing a core that has straight sides like this, I like to start in the middle of the core and sew all the way around the core until I stop. If you are starting somewhere curvy or however your pad is, you can start wherever you like, but I just like, if my core is straight like this, to start on one of the straight edges. I'm going to stitch from the back of my pad to the top of my pad so that the knot stays on the bottom side and your neat stitching is on the top. So I am going to do a back stitch all the way around. So to do that, I'm going to bring my needle up and about the length of a grain of rice away, I'm going to bring my needle back down. And then I'm going to go to the bottom of my stitch, pull it up, and then go back into my last stitch. And I'm going to continue stitching like that all the way around until my core is attached to my pad. So you're going to want to stay a little bit away from the edge. You're not going to want to stitch right on the edge because if your fabric starts to fray when it's washed, this is going to keep it there. As well as that, be mindful of how long your stitches are. You want to keep them kind of small and consistent. You don't want big giant stitches and you don't want running stitches because those will not hold up as well. If you have nice, neat, small stitches, your pad is going to stay together much better for much longer. So I'm going to sew all the way around my core and then come back. Okay, so I'm almost done with my core. I've stitched all the way around the core, and now all I have to do is finish tying my last thread. So I thought I'd show you how to do that in case you don't know. So you're just going to go up between the threads. I'm going to see if I can focus for you. Go up underneath your threads and pull your thread through until you have a little loop. Then you put your needle through that loop. Make sure you're not putting it through the individual threads, just the loop. And you are going to pull it through. And you're going to do that a couple of times to make a nice sturdy knot. Just like that. And then from here, all we have to do is clip it, and our core is attached to our topper. So we're going to take our backer. Remember, we marked one of the wings, and we are going to lay the marking to the marking. If you didn't cut your topper, then you could always just lay it down and cut your topper at this point. Now we're going to make sure that all of our edges line up nice and neat, because the way that you put your pad together now is the way that your pad is going to be forever. Sometimes you'll notice with fleece that one side is a little more fuzzy than the other. Some people like the fuzzy side out, some people like the fuzzy side in, but I don't think this particular fleece necessarily has a right or a wrong side. Okay. So now that we've got it all lined up, what we're going to do is you're going to either pin or clip. When I am doing my top stitching, I prefer to clip, so that's what I'm going to do. But if you want to pin, that is a method that you're welcome to use. So we have gotten it all pinned or clipped, however you prefer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the stitching. So you're going to make sure that your topper is face up, and whatever side of your backer that you want facing out is facing out, because however we sew this is going to be how the pad is going to be finished. So we're going to take our needle with the thread attached to it, and we are going to make a knot. And we're gonna repeat this a couple of times. I'm gonna do it so I've tied it 3 times in a knot. Make sure it's nice and secure. And then I'm going to cut the tail off. Normally when I am just sewing the core to it, I'm not worried about the tail, but this is gonna be on the outside, so I cut the little tail off. So I am going to start over here, and I'm going to show you how to make a blanket stitch. So from the back of your fabric, we're going to come up about a grain of rice length up. And we're going to pull our thread through. Then we are going to go through the back once more. Make sure that you're coming up near enough to your first stitch. You're going to pull it through until you just have a little hoop here. You don't have a whole lot of thread, and you put your needle through that thread and pull it. And then again, you're gonna come from the backer to the topper. Pull your needle through until you have just a little bit of a loop. And then you're going to go through that loop. Make sure that you're not going through the individual threads, that you're going through your little loop, okay? And again, through the backer to the topper, pull it through. Our needle goes through the loop, and then you pull it tight. So as you can see, we have, I'm not sure if it's gonna pull up because I have blue thread on blue, but we have a chain across the top, and then the back has our stitching through it. You're going to go all the way around your pad with the blanket stitch. Make sure that your stitches are little tiny like this and very nice and neat. The bigger you make them, the more your pad will fray when it's washed. Just like any serged pad, the fabric will have a tendency to fray because this is a raw edge. So in order to prevent that, we're going to make our stitches as little as we possibly can. Again, if you use fabrics that don't fray, like a knit, a fleece, things like that, then you won't have to worry about that. If you are washing it and you get a little bit of fraying, then all you have to do is cut it off. There's nothing wrong with that. So I am going to go all the way around the pad with my blanket stitch, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I have done the blanket stitch all the way around. The next step that I am going to do is optional. If you think that just this is sufficient for you, then you can stop here and add your closure of choice. You can add snaps, a button and a buttonhole, Velcro, sew a ribbon and tie it. You can buy little metal snaps that you sew on. Those are a little more accessible. What I am going to do next is I am going to backstitch all the way around the pad at the bottom of my blanket stitch, just to reinforce the edge of my pad. This is completely optional. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. I just think personally that they hold up in the wash a little bit better that way. So I am going to backstitch all the way around at the bottom of my blanket stitch. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to follow the holes that I have already made with the blanket stitch, and I'm going to go all the way around. Just like that. So I'm going to go all the way around the pad doing that, and again, that's just to reinforce it a little bit. Like I said, with the blanket stitch and a fabric that has a tendency to fray, you will have an issue with fraying here, but the additional little back stitch around the edge will help with that, and it'll help elongate the life of your pad if you choose to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that, and I'll be back. Okay, so all around the edging I have a back stitch just to secure it a little bit more, and this step is completely optional, but I do find that it helps the integrity of the pad a little more. So some pros about doing a cloth pad with a blanket stitch is, one, that it makes a super thin pad. So if you can see, I mean, that's basically paper, but as well as that, they are quicker to sew than a turned and top stitch pad, so that could be an advantage for you if you need a stash really quick. Some cons though are that this is not as durable as your turned and top stitch pads are going to be. I don't suspect that these would last as long as a turned and top stitch pad would. Depending on your fabric, they could also curl up a little around the edges, so you would have to definitely lay them flat and press them out or iron them in order to help with that curling. That is all that I have for you today. This is how I first started making pads, so I did use the pads that I made like this for a long while before I learned how to turn and top stitch. If you'd like, you can hit the subscribe button down below, that way you're notified every time I upload a new video. As well as that, you can hit the like button. It just helps YouTube to suggest this video to someone who might need it. If you have any questions or anything, you can leave those down in the comments down below. Thank you again for spending a little bit of time with me today. I definitely appreciate it, and you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?